And what proportion of the logging that's going on here in PNG do you think is actually controlled by Malaysian logging companies?
90% of the logging operations here in Papua New Guinea is controlled by Malaysians, and more specifically Rimbunan Hijau and WTK, plus Wanimo Jaya and Saban Enterprise.
Now, if you were going to sum up the destruction that has been done by those companies, how would you sum it up?
I will say we will have to undertake a field audit and inspection to see whether they have complied with the project agreements and the timber permits of the concessions that they are operating in. That will clearly tell the whole story.
You know, what do you think the full audit will show us about the damage that these companies have done?
Well, if the full audit is undertaken in all these logging concessions where the Malaysians are operating in, it will show several things. One, the logging code of practice is not followed. Two, you will find the minimum wages set by the government of Papua New Guinea is not followed. They're not going by the set minimum wages labor laws. You will find that a lot of the logging areas is clear felled. They're supposed to be operating under selective felling, but you will find that most of the areas are clear felled. And if we look at the project agreement and the timber permit conditions, we will find that many of the infrastructure that they are supposed to put into the project areas have not been built. And the standards of the roads that they build in the logging areas are poor. So you will find a lot of things that are not in compliance with the requirements of the timber permit and the laws of this country.
Yeah, well, that will be very familiar, particularly to East Malaysians.
There are other levies that are charged under the project agreements, like infrastructure development levy, log export development levy, follow-up land use levy, community development levy. These project levies that are supposed to be paid to respective provincial government, landowner companies, some of them have fallen short. The operators have not paid up. So the reason why I'm saying that there needs to be a full audit is to see if these companies that have been operating in the timber concessions have fully complied or not.
So you're saying that you think that the Malaysian companies have been cheating on not paying the dues that they're supposed to?
Yes.
Now, what about the services that they're supposed to provide? Have they been uplifting the communities with the services provided out of the profits of logging here in PNG?
Well, you go to any logging camp in PNG, you will see there is an airstrip if it's remote and the roads are not sealed, and you'll see log bridges. But if you compare that to the project agreement, it's very specific about the type of bridge that is supposed to be built. It's either a bailey bridge or a cement bridge. The road is supposed to be rural class 4 or class 2. You'll see the roads are just cleared forest roads with no sealing and no graveling on it. So these are the things that needs to be looked at more closely.
What about services? What about uplifting the lives of the population? How well are they doing on that front?
We go to a typical logging camp in Western Province in Balimo, Kamusi. You'll see people from around the logging areas are all flocking to the camp at Kamusi. They're living in settlements. It's much worse than living in their own villages. They all cramp up. There is lack of water supply. People are drinking from the streams at the side of the logging camp. There is no proper toilets and sanitation. And they are all feeding from the company's stores. And they're living in more poverty, much more worse than their own village environment. So that's a typical, logging camp.
So far from being modernized, developed and uplifted, you're saying these communities are worse off than when they were in their most primitive original state?
Correct. Because when they live in their own villages before the logging camp, they were much happier. They have clean water. They have no problems. They're happy. They can collect food from the forest, from their gardens. They can hunt. But the logging company comes to bring employment, but it also comes to bring misery to their lives.
What about schools and hospitals? Aren't the logging companies supposed to bring those to the communities?
These are requirements of the timber permit, and the logging companies are supposed to build them in the areas identified by the health authorities and the provincial governments. But you find that these facilities are not built in the areas. Instead, everybody comes to the logging camp because the company builds the hospital or the health services at the logging camp for its staff plus the people immediately around it. So, for example, a logging operation that I used to work in the Gulf province. The company is a Malaysian company. It has not built an hospital or aid post at Araimiri. It has not built an hospital at Opau. It has not built bridges across rivers that were supposed to be built. So this is a typical example of a project that I worked in the 1994 and 95.
And what about uplifting the country as a whole? Are we seeing the profits of the logging, bringing benefits and modernization to Papua New Guinea?
Not much. Not much.
What's the problem?
The problem is the companies, most of the Malaysian companies have not declared profit in this country. And year after year, they continue to operate. So there is no sense in that. A company can continue to only operate if you make profit. If it's not a profitable business, you pack up and you leave. But I find it very funny that many of the Malaysian companies, even though they have not declared profit, are still operating in this country and creaming our forest of all and good hardwood trees and creating misery for the local people in the rural areas where they are operating in.
So, in fact, none of the money is going to the government to improve the country?
They are paying some money, but I don't think that what they are paying is fair. And I think the government on its part has failed to really pull up its socks to investigate these companies because there's a lot of lying and cheating here. They're not declaring profit. How can they be still operating here after many years?
Can you hazard a guess as to why the government has been failing to go after these Malaysian companies to get the profits?
I think it's high-level corruption. The politicians and the loggers are in bed. They are partners in crime.
Can you talk a little bit about the power that these companies, although they're not making any money, the sorts of investments that we're now seeing in Papua?
Well, let me be very specific here. One company that has came into this country in the early 1980s as a subcontractor is now operating in almost 60% of the timber concessions in this country. And that is a Malaysian company by the name of Rimbunan Hijau. They came in as contractors. Now they've expanded their business empire in this country. They've gone into real estate in Port Moresby. Almost about 30% of the real estate in Port Moresby is owned by Rimbunan Hijau. They own Vision City. They own Hypermart. They're now into the banking and finance sector. They bought out Maybank and now they've changed the name to Kina Bank. They own airlines. Tropic Air is theirs. They own shipping companies. Swift Shipping is theirs. They own the national newspaper, which is their propaganda machinery in PNG. And they are expanding as we are talking here on camera. So they are untouchable.
There are also concerns that local people are being badly treated by the companies. That's true, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very true. We've heard of a lot of abuses. The Malaysian companies or many of the logging operations were deploying police officers to be security guards. And we've also had in Western Province a case where police officers locked up local people in containers. So these are the abuses that are taking place in logging areas where many of these Malaysian companies are deploying police personnel as their private security guards.
It sounds like thuggish tactics towards local communities if they oppose the logging. Is that what's happening?
It's happening all around the logging operations in PNG, and more specifically, we've had that in Western Province, and we've had that in Pomio, a recent operations by one of the Malaysian company's subsidiary, Guilford. in Pomio.
What do they do?
What we've heard is they have deployed police personnel from Rabaul to provide security guards and started belting the local people that opposed to the logging operations, because many of the local people are saying that they did not agree to the SABL operations and they never consented to their land being used for logging and then eventually converted to oil palm plantations. So the landowners that have been opposing have been subjected to police brutality.
Is it possible to have development without deforestation and mass plantations?
Yes and no. As I said again, you need to have a proper plan. Forestry operations can go hand in hand with the development, but what we've seen here in Papua New Guinea is logging has totally gone on its own without bringing any development.
What do you think the motive of the Malaysian logging companies has been here in Papua New Guinea? Has it been to bring development?
No, they're here to make money from our logs and our forest. And now the trend is they're now going into oil palm development on the land. And so that's something new. For Pomio in East New Britain, they've harvested all the forest under the SABL, and now they've gone into oil palm development. In Wawi, Block 1, Block 2, and Block 3, they've done logging. The timber permit is still alive, and they're still continuing logging there. But I'm hearing that they want to put oil palm in.
Is this any good? Does this do good for the local people?
Oil palm is going to destroy the local people. The forest has been their way of life. Now logging has gone in, logging has now displaced them from the original villages and dragged them to the towns where the logging operations are based in. For example, Kamusi. So if oil palm goes in, what is left there for the people? Nothing. The people are going to just die.
What changes have come as a result of the logging? How was it before?
Life before logging was people on a daily basis. The family goes to the garden, the family goes fishing, father goes hunting, making sago, and living peacefully in the environment, in the forest. When logging came with a lot of new changes, meaning that the father will be absent from the family working in the logging camp as a chainsaw operator or as a driver. He will be leaving the family behind, and the family will also be following the father to the logging camp. The family will be leaving behind what they used to do. It's a complete new change for the family. So things that they used to do before is not going to be the same.
Just one question. To what extent did people understand that these were the changes that would come? To what extent were they tricked by the incoming loggers into making legal agreements that they, then couldn't get out of?
I think a lot of the local people that have entered into logging agreements in the past do not really understood what they were signing up for. There was no proper education and awareness about what changes were coming, and whatever paper they were signing up to, they really had no idea.
Do you think they were tricked? Do you think they were conned?
I think they were conned, and that responsibility is going to be laid squarely on the forestry authorities in PNG that failed to create awareness and for the people to understand the changes that's going to take place in their forest, in their community, in the area that they're living in, and what they're signing up to, how much money they will be receiving, and the changes that's going to happen. So the failure and the responsibility will be passed on to the PNG government authorities.
So what is your biggest fear environmentally for those areas?
My biggest fear is that if the government continues allowing oil palm plantation in this country, we will end up losing all the forest, and we're creating lots of problems for ourselves. Lots of people moving from rural areas into oil palm plantation and being exploited, underpaid, living in poor housing conditions, and a lot of abuses. So I think the government now should stop new plantation development for oil palms. and resort to other ways of creating development and creating employment opportunities for Papua New Guineans.
Could you end up as a desert if you carry on with these palm plantations?
We will definitely, and we will also lose our biodiversity, and we will lose a lot of local knowledge, a lot of local medicinal plants, and we end up also losing the land to the foreign-owned companies that are now building up the oil palm plantations, and we will forever lose what we owned to foreigners.
So if you succeed with your new reforming plans, what could Papua New Guinea and Malaysia achieve together?
Well, we, as countries at the political level, we can become very good friends and good partners. A lot of things Papua New Guinea learn from Malaysia, and a lot of things we can share with Malaysia, because PNG is a very resource-rich country. And I see the new government of Papua New Guinea under the leadership of Prime Minister James Marape. He wants to take back PNG. He wants to make PNG become wealthy, become independent, self-reliant. He wants to develop the industry. He wants Papua New Guineans to be educated. He wants to move this country to a next level. And so at that dream that the Prime Minister has, and Malaysians, if we can work together with our government, I believe there's a lot more to gain from just becoming partners as countries, members of the Commonwealth.